January, or July, not January, still Tuesday, July 21st, the birthday of our city attorney, Josh. And we will start off by looking at the latest report of our Sherwood renewal feasibility study.
I think Councilor Scott had raised his hand, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if he had a question before we start.
Oh, Doug?
You're muted.
I thought we were going to continue with the other topics, so I'll take my hand down until we get back to it.
Perfect. All right, away we go.
So I'll briefly introduce Elaine and Nick, who you've met a few times. Bruce emailed the report as well as the PowerPoint presentation to you
Julia, you're freezing up.
but they're going to explain it because they do much better data when it comes to a location like which is the only good spot with the door that closes. Anyways, I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Elaine.
Got every other word of that, Julia.
Power through. I like it.
No, Elaine, go.
Okay, so can folks hear me? This is Nick.
You sound out.
Okay, great. And do folks see the PowerPoint presentation on the screen as well?
Yep.
All right. So Nick Popenook and Elaine Howard, this is, I think, our third time we've been in front of you. This is at the end of our feasibility study phase of the project. So we'll briefly recap a few of the things we talked about earlier and then quickly cut into the key results that we have. We'll start again with a recap of boundaries and financial capacity. Then the heart of the conversation tonight is really this statutory limit on acreage. We will also touch base on the foregone revenues that would come along with an urban renewal area, and then talk about the recommended next steps. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I understand that there have been some questions from council on exactly where we are in the process of creating an urban renewal area and what comes next and how would that timeline, or what would that timeline look like. And I'm going to turn it over to Elaine to talk about that as she's really in the driver's seat from the consultant side on everything that would happen beyond the feasibility stage.
So this timeline just shows the latest schedule for adopting a new urban renewal plan that would be effective before a tax roll was certified in October of 2021, so next year. If a tax roll is certified in October before an urban renewal area is adopted, before that October 2021 tax roll, it is based on values of January 2020. So that is what we're looking at. That makes it so that we can capture new development that is happening at this time. So to do that, February of next year would be the latest time you would want to start on an urban renewal plan with task force meetings. So if you started at that point, for 3 months you would have task force meetings that would include your taxing jurisdictions and key stakeholders, typically a planning commissioner and city council member. Then the 4th month you typically would have an agency meeting that would review a draft plan. Then the next month a planning commission meeting to find conformance to your comprehensive plan. And then the following month you would have a hearing and review of a non-emergency ordinance. In most cities at 2 meetings, and then it becomes effective 30 days afterwards. So before you could actually adopt a new plan, you would have to make some adjustments to your existing area. And as we move through this presentation, we talk about those potential adjustments to the existing area. That can happen along the same time as you're having your task force meetings. So all of this can be moved forward. If you decided you wanted to start next month, all of this could be moved forward, and you would have a plan effective before that September date. There's no real reason to have a plan effective before that date in terms of capturing the tax roll that you want to capture. So you are in good shape in terms of a timeline for moving this process ahead, according to the feasibility that we've looked at.
Tim has his hand up. You want to ask a question right now?
Just a super quick question on the timing. In past long sessions, there's been, down in Salem, there's been some efforts from especially the special districts to limit our ability to set up a URA. Have you heard of anything coming up in this long session that might cause us to want to move quicker than we would normally move in terms of getting something set up?
I have not heard of anything. Nick and I were active in the 2019 session. There were a number of changes that happened that we helped negotiate, and in response to concerns from the taxing districts, we have not heard of anything that's being talked about to bring it to the next session. Obviously, we don't know what people are talking about in terms of COVID-19 issues or responses, so something could come up that we don't anticipate, but as of now, we haven't heard of anything.
And I would add to that in the 2019 session where there were significant changes, those changes wound up taking effect around the September timeline. I can't remember the exact date that was specified in statute.
September 29th.
Yeah, so even, let's say history were to repeat itself and there were some changes, and those changes were not retroactive but only applied to plans going forward, this timeline would still allow you to have an urban renewal plan that probably comes into play and is effective before anything that takes place in the legislature next year becomes effective. If there was something that was particularly troublesome, you might want to shift this up a month or two. But as Elaine was mentioning earlier, there's nothing that's preventing you from shifting this up 6 months and begin work on this immediately next month. So there's, I think, plenty of time to get in ahead of any impacts of hypothetical changes to Oregon statutes.
Right. We just wanted to present you with the latest dates that you would want to be undertaking this, knowing that you could undertake it well before this if you wanted.
All right, thank you for that. I appreciate that. My preference would be to start early enough that we have some cushion in case something comes up, but I appreciate the insight on what's happening in Salem.
Okay, keep going. All right. So just to touch base on the boundaries, this slide shows, I believe, the exact boundaries that we presented a month ago when we were last in front of you for a virtual city council meeting. We did make a couple of changes to these boundaries. So here are the updated boundaries. You might, if you blinked, you might have missed what any of those changes were. So here are some circles to highlight them. We'll go from left to right. So in the bottom left corner, we can see that boundary number 2, we expanded it to bring in the YMCA property. We heard from City Council at our last meeting that since we've identified that as a potential project, it also makes sense to include it as part of the boundary. So it doesn't have any assessed value, it doesn't impact the actual TIF forecast, but it is a place where we're considering potentially investing urban renewal dollars. Moving north of boundary 2, we can see one property that's circled there. Again, members of City Council pointed out to us that property is development ready, that I believe that there are talks of a future hotel developing there, and so that's the possibility to include it in a new urban renewal area so that you could capture the increment from that to help fund projects in that general area. The third circle in the middle of the page shows that we have connected with a cherry stem along some public right-of-way. What used to be boundary 3, the North Gateway area, that has now been connected and combined with boundary 1. So when we talked with you last month, it was clear that boundary 3 by itself did not have sufficient financial capacity to fund the necessary infrastructure there. And so rather than look at it as a standalone urban renewal area, it made sense to combine it with the larger Boundary 1. And so we've done that for the final feasibility study here. Any questions on these boundaries before we move into the financial capacity conversation? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
finding my phone, but yeah.
Okay. So for financial capacity, this chart is just summarizing the total capacity in constant 2020 dollars and comparing it to the preliminary cost estimates. So we can see that for both the boundaries, our preliminary costs are higher than the anticipated capacity. That is typically the case when we are looking at feasibility studies. So it's no surprise that cities have a list of infrastructure projects they'd like to fund that exceeds the financial capacity available to them. So if the city were to move forward with proposing a new urban renewal plan or plans, some of the first steps would be working in those task force meetings, those advisory meetings, to refine the project lists and either remove some projects or identify some that would only partially be funded with urban renewal, so that you do align your capacity estimates with your estimated project costs. And in the detailed feasibility study report, there are tables for both Boundary 1 and Boundary 2 that list the specific projects that are included in these cost estimates.
And remind me again, just because you don't have any of it labeled, what on the map is Boundary 1 and what is Boundary 2 again?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so sorry for not having those labeled. Boundary 2 is on the west side of the city along 99W. Boundary 1 is all of the other green and pink property that's shown. So on the east side and in the north gateway area, and that small cherry stem connector between the two of them. And on the map, the reason that we have three different colors here, green is new property to be included in one of the new boundaries. Yellow is property that's in the existing urban renewal area, and the pinkish red color is property that is currently in the existing URA, but is also proposed to be in one of the new URAs, and so it's overlapping both of them. So now, again, the heart of the conversation today, we're looking at the statutory limit on acreage. The Oregon revised statutes maintain that any city cannot have more than 25% of its total acreage included within urban renewal areas. So for the city of Sherwood, where we have a little over 3,000 total acres, urban renewal areas cannot exceed 772 acres. The existing urban renewal area is 616 acres, so that does not leave a lot of capacity for new districts. When we look at the combination of the existing area and the potential boundaries 1 and 2, all three combined would add up to over 1,300 acres, which is 44% of the city, and that exceeds the statutory limit by 575 acres. So this is right now the largest limiting factor on adopting new urban renewal areas in the city. Fortunately, there are strategies that will mitigate this limitation. So, in order to establish the new urban renewal areas that we're looking at, the city could reduce acreage from the existing urban renewal area. That frees up the capacity for new ones. You could also look at staged adoption of one or more boundaries, so adopting one of the urban renewal areas now, but waiting to adopt another one until after the existing boundary has terminated. And you could also look at reducing the size of the potential new boundaries, or any combination of those three strategies. I actually would point out a fourth. We haven't gone into detail on this talking with staff, but we could if City Council wanted to move forward, which is that if there's going to be land annexed into the city, every 4 acres of land that you annex gives you 1 more acre of land that you could include in urban renewal areas. So it's possible that if there were large properties that were planned to be annexed in the future, if you were able to accelerate the timeline of those annexations, that could free up more capacity for you in the short term as well. When we look at potential staged adoption of the boundaries, if we're going to delay one or both of them till after the existing urban renewal area has expired, the biggest impact is, or negative impact, is on financial capacity. So this is showing our forecasts for Boundary 1. We ran 3 different growth rates for assessed value, ranging from 4% at the low end to 6% on the high end. This shows the total cumulative financial capacity of the district under those 3 scenarios if we adopted the plans next year versus if they were adopted 2 years later after the existing URA is scheduled to expire. What we see here is that in the lower growth scenarios, this would have a negative impact on the financial capacity. And that's because there are development projects that are planned to be happening now and in the very near future. And if the urban renewal area is delayed, those projects will become part of the frozen base instead of becoming part of the increment value. And so they would be generating tax revenue for all the overlapping taxing districts instead of tax revenue for the urban renewal area. At higher growth rates, this loss of revenue is overcome by the fact that you have a larger frozen base. We're applying a fixed percentage growth to it, and that larger percent growth on a higher frozen base would allow it to catch up to the initial projections over the long term. So that's why we see in the 6% scenario, it becomes a positive number. In Boundary 2, there is less immediate forecast development in the area, so delaying it would have less of an impact on the borrowing capacity long term. But even though it doesn't have a significant impact on the long-term cumulative capacity, it still has an impact on the timing of that capacity. So if you were to delay adoption by 2 years, that means that the time when you could fund projects in the area is 2 years delayed throughout the entire course of the life of the urban renewal area. So it's, even though in the aggregate it looks like it's about the same, it would have a timing impact. And this slide illustrates that timing impact. This is just for one of the scenarios, Boundary 1, with low growth, but you can see how a 2-year delay means that the urban renewal area is always 2 steps behind what would happen if you're able to adopt it next year. So because staged adoption of the urban renewal areas has that negative impact on financial capacity, we are focusing a lot of our attention on reducing urban renewal area boundaries, either reducing the existing area or the potential new areas. This slide shows how many total acres you need to cut in order to accommodate the urban renewal areas based on which combinations you wanted to proceed at the same time. So you can see that if you were only doing the existing urban renewal area plus Boundary 2, you'd actually be under the capacity limit and you wouldn't need to cut anything. If you were doing the existing plus Boundary 1, you would need to cut 445 acres, and if you're doing all 3 of them, you'd have to cut 575 acres. It's important to note that even if the existing area expires, Boundaries 1 and 2 by themselves are slightly above the limit, and so 46 acres would still need to be cut in that scenario. So where would we want to cut acreage from? This very colorful slide tries to show some examples of where you might want to cut. So the blue hash marked areas, those are the lands that overlap with a potential new urban renewal area. So those would already be cut because we need to take them out of this district in order to add them into the potential new urban renewal boundary. Beyond those overlapping lands, the dark blue area, the stripes going throughout, crisscrossing this district, that's all the public right-of-way. All of that is tax exempt, so removing that does not have any negative impact on the financial capacity of the district. Likewise, the green hashed areas is also exempt property. That's publicly owned or nonprofit or otherwise exempt land. So again, that land could all be removed without financially impacting the district. Beyond those blue and green areas, we're left with a map of yellow, orange, and red tax lots. All of those are taxable property, and removing any of them would have a negative impact on the financial capacity of this district. If that negative impact were too great, you could wind up in a position where you have reduced the annual TIF revenue below the threshold that you need in order to make your annual debt service payments. This is an analysis that would have to happen. It would be actually the immediate next step if City Council wants to move forward. And this would be a coordination between a GIS analyst doing the spatial map making work and financial analysts looking at what that impact would be on the annual TIF revenue and working with your finance manager to see how that would impact the ability to pay debt service going forward. When we look at that last map, the tax-exempt property is what we refer to as the low-hanging fruit. So that's the right-of-way and then all the tax lots that are tax-exempt. And those combined add up to 255 acres that you could cut. Anything beyond that is going to have that negative impact on financial capacity. So in addition to cutting the low-hanging fruit from the existing boundary, another approach, and one that we have seen in several other jurisdictions, is to temporarily scale back the initial size of the proposed new urban renewal areas and then expand those boundaries later after the existing URA has expired. However, there are limits to that as well. So no urban renewal area can be increased in size more than 20% of its initial acreage. So when we do the arithmetic on that, we know that the proposed new boundaries could be reduced by 114 acres in Boundary 1 and 22 acres in Boundary 2, and reducing them by that amount would allow you to add those acres back in after the existing area expires. If you cut any more than that from the proposed new boundaries, you would not be able to get them back up to their full extent. So all of this being said, if you cut all of the low-hanging fruit from the existing URA, the tax-exempt properties and right-of-way, and if you do a temporary reduction in the new boundaries by the maximum amount possible to still expand them later, this is where we wind up with in terms of how far over the limits we are. If you were also...
Nick, are you counting the overlap in one of these slides?
So the overlap has already been assumed subtracted out before we ever got to the targeted numbers. So when we're looking at this slide here, and we're showing, an example, if we're trying to do existing plus boundary 1 plus boundary 2, and we're showing we need to cut 575 acres, the area of overlap is only being counted in the new urban renewal areas. So we've already assumed that we've taken it out of the existing in order to include it in the new. So when we get here, we're saying that once we take out that low-hanging fruit, and if we make those temporary reductions in the new boundaries, if you wanted to pursue only boundary 2, you would not need to make any additional cuts. If you wanted to pursue only boundary 1, we would need to find 76 acres to cut. And if we wanted to pursue boundaries 1 and 2, we would need to cut another 184 acres. It's likely that the very first place that we'd be cutting is from its taxable property in the existing urban renewal area, because it does sound like there is significant financial capacity there above and beyond what's needed to pay debt service. And so we do have the ability to cut some land and reduce some of the TIF revenue each year without getting into a financially risky place. Again, more work is needed in the very next phase of the analysis to see how much you could cut from the existing urban renewal area while maintaining a healthy financial position.
So this is Tim. Just off the top of my head here, if I understand right, the new water treatment plant, there's probably about a 50 to 60 acre parcel there. They're not going to be paying any property taxes, so it would make sense to cut that out of boundary area 1 just right off the bat. And then my second question is, does PGE pay property tax?
No.
Because they have that they do not for the training center.
They have the training center.
I've already I've already sort of calculated that in very high level, quick, and it's about 100 acres of PGE, Northwest Natural, City of Tualatin, and the water treatment plant properties in the proposed boundary 1.
That's right, which is
So it's gonna mean that they're not in there now already.
So you're saying they're already taken out, or we can't take them out?
We could take them out.
Okay, good.
with this new
But
plan.
going back to the new proposed boundaries, they look to be already removed to me. Oh no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Never mind. I'm looking at the wrong side of 12 Sherwood Road. Never mind.
Oh no, it's still there. Right, there's the PGE property, there's other water properties. Earlier you said, about city expansions, big chunks of boundary 1 are not in the city limits. So we can't put them in the boundary if they're not in the city limits, right?
They can be in the boundary, so urban renewal areas, and Elaine actually can speak to this more, but cities can have urban renewal boundaries that expand beyond their city limits. Those acres still count against your cap from a statutory perspective because of the way that the statute worded. But if you were to annex those properties before creating the urban renewal area, that would free up additional capacity.
Yeah.
So the acre, if you are including areas outside the city limits, the acres are included in the numerator of the equation, but not in the denominator.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And we do have a couple of annexations coming to council in September for the Kerr and Holly property. I can't remember how many acres that is off the top of my head. It's not a huge amount, but maybe 30.
Close to 45 together.
Okay.
So it buys us 10 acres.
Yep. And one other point I'd bring up, just I heard mention of PGE property, and I don't know the specific PGE property in question here, but PGE as a utility company, they typically are taxable, but their taxes are paid on a completely different basis. So the individual tax lot does not receive a bill, but the company as a whole receives a bill, and it is apportioned to all the different tax code areas. So if we were to remove PGE property, it could have a negative impact on the financial capacity, but it would not be identified as a specific tax.
So PG, there's what I hoped we would have today would be more of that already done. Because my next steps would be to not hire you to turn around and form these things or propose a plan to form these things. Personally, I want to see a little bit of money spent to whittle these things down to try to launch them all at the same time, launch them both at the same time, scale back the existing one, remove the stuff that doesn't belong on the 2 proposed ones, and then further scrutinize the development capacity with the lower, smaller spaces. And I don't think that should take very long.
Yeah, I agree that having heard from City Council and also having had conversations with staff over the last couple of weeks about where things could be cut, and talking with the finance director about the relative financial capacity compared to the desired annual debt service payments and the required annual debt service payments, I definitely think that there's a path forward here. Identifying the specific acres to cut and identifying what impact that would have on the existing frozen base, the existing increment value, the total annual TIF revenue, and while maintaining a contiguous boundary so that we didn't accidentally chop it into small pieces. All of those things just takes a little fine-tuning, but it should not be a lengthy process. It's all something that can be taken care of in a matter of weeks.
Yeah. And then, removing floodplain lots, and there's these little ones here and there that just can screw stuff up. When you're doing a cherry stem, do you have to use the entire right-of-way width?
No, and Elaine can speak to this more about what she's seen in other jurisdictions, but there is not a hard and fast limit anywhere on how narrow those cherry stems are allowed to be.
In fact, in one city, we did a 3-foot width cherry stem along the edge of a road because we didn't have a project in that road. We just needed to connect parcels.
Yep. So then, what if a cherry stem crosses another district?
It cannot.
Thank you. Important little details. Okay. There's one other thing that could be analyzed very quickly, probably removed, is the notion of connecting all of it, doing a cherry stem up 99, so that there's not a boundary 1 and boundary 2, there's just a boundary 1A, big boundary.
Yeah.
Old and the new, but you've got substantial stuff on the other side of 99 on the existing one.
Yeah, exactly. And one other point, we discussed that with staff earlier this week as well, and when it comes to proceeding with one combined boundary versus two separate ones, from a technical perspective, financial capacity perspective, all you're doing is combining the two numbers together. From an administrative perspective, it's a plus because you only have one plan to deal with, one budget to approve every year, one audit to pay for. The only drawback, and it depends on the politics of any situation, is that you could have two very different areas with very different goals and objectives and different lists of projects and different interested stakeholders. And now that they've been combined together, there can be tension about, these funds should really be spent on our half of the district this year, not that half of the district. And so there's a little bit of push and pull over where the money is spent in that situation.
Yeah, but I think we can, one high-level thing to just peruse, if in reducing the existing urban renewal boundary, if you removed everything on the north side of 99, would that get us there?
Mm-hmm.
And do a cherry stem. Because I just think there is the potential value in giving future council, future boards, future urban renewal board that flexibility. Yes, it could create some fight, but there is some ease of management, but there is also, if one side grows faster than the other, then the growth on one can help accelerate the growth of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any reason that cherry stem has to go up 99 in it? Just kind of go around?
A cherry stem typically goes on a right-of-way because if you do it across tax lots, your assessor is going to be very unhappy with you because they will have to set up a different tax code area for every tax lot that you take a portion of to put within an urban renewal area. So we rarely would ever do that.
I think what Tim was getting at is you could go down Murdoch and Sunset and connect up that way.
Yes, you could use a different right-of-way.
Yeah.
But that takes acreage. I mean, if it's a narrow swath, that's better, but it still will, the longer it is, the more acres it takes away from what we could include.
Yeah.
I bet you could go down 99, turn up and go around on Borchers.
Yeah,
So
that would,
That's what I was kind of thinking, is just kind of route around it if you don't want to give up those properties, especially that potential hotel site.
All right, I'll let you keep going.
We're almost at the finish line here. So one of the things we just wanted to make sure we talked about, because it was not the focus of any of the past presentations, was the foregone revenue. So there is no free lunch. The funds that we're talking about for urban renewal are a division of property tax revenue. That means there are not impacts on taxpayers. There are impacts on other taxing districts. So this slide is showing, for one of our scenarios, the medium growth for boundary 1, the annual foregone revenue from each of the overlapping taxing districts. And we can see that the big four are the city, the county, TVF&R and the Sherwood School District. These are real dollars that they would be missing out on over the period of the urban renewal area. Those dollars, though, when you look at them in the grand scheme of things, tend to not look quite so daunting. So the dark blue bar or blue area at the bottom of this chart are the exact same numbers that I just showed for the city. The foregone revenue each year over the life of the urban renewal area. The lighter blue is the total projected tax revenue for the city over that time period. And so you can see that while urban renewal area is real, it is also a relatively small part of the total projected revenues.
And Nick, this is Tim. If memory serves me correctly, for the school portion of that, all of that money, that doesn't go directly to the Sherwood School. That goes to the state and gets reallocated across the entire state. Is that correct?
Yeah, you had the exact next bullet point here.
Okay.
So when we're talking about those foregone revenues on school districts, we say that it is an indirect impact. So the schools are all funded the exact same amount per student that's set at the state level by the state legislature. The local property tax revenues are only a small chunk of the total school funding, with the majority of funding coming from the state. And no matter what causes local property tax revenues to go up or down, there are no direct benefits or impacts for a school district. They only receive the same amount as everyone else across the state. One thing to also keep in mind when it comes to schools and urban renewal areas is that local option levies are not included in the calculation of tax increment revenue. So if the school district has a local option levy, or if they're going to pass one in the future, to the extent that new development takes place in the urban renewal area and generates new assessed value, that would immediately have a positive impact on the local option levies for the school. Other key things to keep in mind is the but-for argument. So when we look at the foregone revenue, if you're doing your urban renewal areas right, if you're setting up a good urban renewal plan, you're going to be investing in projects that are stimulating new development, and that development would not have happened but for the urban renewal area. So some of those foregone revenues would never have existed if the urban renewal area wasn't there to begin with. Also, when we look at these foregone revenues, it just underscores the importance of demonstrating to your affected taxing districts, the ones who are going to be missing out on this revenue, that your projects and your plan have strong community support, that these are things that the residents of Sherwood want to see funded, and that there isn't any way for these projects to happen without urban renewal, and also to communicate a strong argument for why these projects will lead to more assessed value growth in the area, and how they're key to long-term economic development here. With all that being said, we come to our recommended next steps. These recommended next steps, I think, have morphed a bit since we put this original slide together. So when we first put our recommendations together, the amount of acres that looked like they needed to be cut from the combination of new and existing boundaries seemed like a daunting challenge. But the more that we have spoken with staff and tonight with City Council, the more it looks like there is sufficient capacity to cut the acreage required to move forward with both boundaries at the same time. And so what we have on the slide would be a minor amendment to the existing urban renewal area to reduce acreage. That stays true. Then adopting a new urban renewal plan for Boundary 1. I think the recommendation down below is where we're leaning now, which is to adopt urban renewal plans for both Boundaries 1 and 2 simultaneously, recognizing that it requires cutting additional acreage. And then after that, we would terminate the existing urban renewal plan, which would allow you, once all the debt is paid off, which would allow you to do these substantial amendments to the new boundaries to increase their acreage to the desired size. So that's really the alternative recommendation that is listed on this slide. I believe it's the direction that we're heading now. And then I will just turn it over to Elaine, these next two slides. This again just covers the timelines that we're talking about. what it would take for a minor amendment, and then what it would take for plan adoption. We already covered a bit of this at the beginning of the presentation, though, so this is probably just a brief refresh or recap.
So just looking at a process of doing a minor amendment to an existing urban renewal area, the first month you would identify those properties to be removed. To be able to do that, you have to get a new legal description. And typically when you hire a contractor to do that, we have found that we don't do that ourselves, that can take another month, and then you would go ahead and do that minor amendment to your plan and record that with the county. So that timeline can be squished. That timeline can be done concurrently with starting to develop the new plan. Once you've identified those properties to be removed, you could go ahead with the whole procedure to remove them while you are starting on the new plans if you wanted to do that. And then, again, this just goes back to the schedule for adopting a new plan, and again, this is the latest time that you would want to start the process, just given the steps that we typically go through with localities of doing an urban renewal plan adoption.
All right, so I think that is the end of our formal presentation. I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and everything else is City Council discussion and direction.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Elaine. I think the next step is for us to hire the consultant to further refine this, namely the boundaries, to see what identify the properties that can be removed from the existing acreage, existing boundary, and then look at how we can tweak the proposed boundary 1 and 2, including the potential of making them just one boundary, where it's limited, that so they can be expanded by 20% after the existing one closes, and further review offline those impacts to the value potential for projects. And then once we agree to then hire Elaine and Nick to create a new renewal district. But I think some refinement's required before we commit to the dollar amount and if it's going to be a one boundary or two boundaries. Other thoughts?
So, Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question of our consulting team real quick, based on that recommendation or suggestion? We talked about that today, and it seems like the mayor's saying it is a two-step process, but we were talking about it all being combined into the next step. So, I guess I want to allow Elaine to talk about what is normally the next step, because you've told us that further refinement is in the development of the plan.
You could easily do it the way the mayor has proposed, where your next step is looking at the reduction of the existing area and matching up those acreages that you need. And you can just do that as one discrete step, and then as you determine that acreage, decide when you want to move forward with the step after that. So yes, you could easily break that out the way the mayor has talked about it.
And that's where I know there's a sense of urgency, at least I've had, a lot of conversation with the mayor about this, and I want to make sure that we're moving as quickly as possible. Doing things thoroughly, but also moving quickly, so.
Well, my grievance was just I'd hoped we had done more before today, but can't go back in time. Because I'm still not on the I'm still not, I want to, as we adjust boundaries, I want to carefully review. I'm not going to, today I'm not prepared to sign off on the potential indebtedness limits,
Oh,
for instance.
yeah, we aren't expecting that today. So, I think the issue for us was that next step wasn't ever in our scope of work, and given our scope of work and other work that we had on our plate to do, we weren't able to do that. So we needed to add that to the scope of work, and then have Nick's group work with your staff on doing that next step. And I think what we talked about today is that can be done within the next month, and that certainly doesn't interfere with being able to accomplish your goals.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. I think we're on the same page, so thank you.
Criticism of you, Elaine. I knew what the scope of work was. I just urged Joe to amend the scope of work into his capacity to do it and move it forward. That's all right. Other comments or thoughts? Council?
Could I just ask a quick question? In terms of when we're looking at reducing the size of the current URA, do we still want to just focus on the current URA that we're closing that down in the fiscal year 22-23, or do you want us to look at other options of possibly extending that closure, just so we could reduce the acreage even more? That's a question I have. Do you want us to look at multiple options?
Not in my vision, but I'm just one voice. I don't want to close it out so we can get the gain on the tax rolls to the general fund.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think I agree with that as well.
Me too.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think I'm hearing that we are definitely getting direction to sort of move to next step A, which is refine the boundaries, but not proceed with the process of actually forming the URA plans quite yet, but knowing that we will be able to do that when and if we're able to define the boundaries a little bit more. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my perspective. Just because we don't know from a process standpoint if, in my mind, I'm not convinced if we should have 2 new boundaries or just 1. I don't know that answer yet. And maybe that's not important to be able to launch this from a contract standpoint, but I figured it probably is impactful on a contract.
So, Julia, I think I understand what the mayor is saying, and for Elaine chiming in saying we can certainly do it the way he's suggesting, and we can move quickly.
Yeah.
So, I don't see any issues with that, so.
Anything else for the good of the conversation, council? Are we happy with what the next step? Like what they're seeing, hate what they're seeing?
I'm good with the next step.
Me too.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I am as well.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Nick. And I'll let you finish enjoying the rest of your evening with something else.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your
Thank
time.
you.
Yes.
So, Nick, if you can make sure you unthing that, okay.
Great. So now we'll go back to the conversation that for our work session that we started before our council meeting this evening. And that is the draft to small business grant programs. We got a quick overview by Julia and Bruce. Questions? Do we want Bruce to go over one of them again? We can do that too.
I have a quick question. Hey, so is that, in one of the documents I forgot, was it the state, probably the state, guidelines, what is historically disadvantaged? What, do we have a definition of that?
We do.
Okay.
We do. It's defined by the state as business owners that are Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native American, or women-owned businesses. That's the definition of historically disadvantaged.
Thank you. That's what I thought it was, but.
I think it's the new way of saying minority and women-owned businesses.
Right. The other question I have was the process by which these would be awarded. I have two mindsets to make it completely fair. I kind of like the idea of a lottery. At the same time, for that business that is like on top of it, they got their documents, they're ready to go, they get in line, they're first, they're early, and then they don't get picked in the lottery. I kind of feel like, I don't know, and the business who maybe waited, I'm not saying that this is happening, but, you know, how do you feel about the lottery system?
So I almost guarantee you that we're going to very quickly, just because of the way it happened last time, we're going to very quickly, within the first few hours,
Right.
get way more applicants. And so I don't know that, it's not like we're going to be waiting for a week to get, all the applications. I think it's going to be very quick. So I don't know if there's...
What I meant was not the process once we open it, the process, once we announce the process to get ready for that moment. I think for some businesses will be easier than for others. I'm not saying that we should change the system. I was just wondering how the council felt about the lottery system, and I think it's a fair, open system, but I don't know. What do you think?
Russell, I think you bring up a really good point. I think you bring up a good point, Russell. What I look at it from two ways. One is you have the business that's on top of it that might lose the lottery, but they're larger, they have accountants, it's easy for them to generate all that stuff, and then you have really small businesses where it's a challenge to generate some of this stuff. So it's a tough one.
And remember, the lottery, the true lottery was with a $35,000. It's going to be such a small amount of money that trying to prioritize and figure out who's going to get it, especially if it's a larger business that's eligible for the $25,000, it just seemed like the simplest and most fair way to do it would be the lottery. With the larger amount, we're proposing to do the points and sort of falling back on the lottery if we need to help make a decision.
Doug's next.
I really like the point when...
Go ahead, Renee.
No, I'm done.
Okay. I like the idea. I really like the idea of a point system, but I want to see what that looks like before I sign off on it. I want to see exactly how the points are going to work.
Yeah.
And then with the lottery to break ties. I have a couple questions. In both programs, specifically, there was some of the requirements were around you can't have received, previous different types of fundings, and I think PPP was in both of them. I could be remembering the wrong program, but my recollection was the second round of government federal funding that the PPP, there was more available, and they kept saying, we still have money, and people weren't taking it. So are we going to end up in the case of PPP eliminates you? Are we actually going to have enough businesses that haven't already gotten PPP, or is that many really didn't ever get it?
Okay, so that's the question. So Bruce or Julia, answer that question.
Well, we keep hearing that businesses have been getting PPP. I don't know who specifically in the community got PPP money. I know that a lot struggled to get that kind of money, in essence, and so it's hard to say, quite honestly, that if we do it that way, that we're just not going to have enough businesses coming in. And this was something that I think we said in one of the programs, which was the Federal CARES Act program, we said priority would be given to those that did not receive. However, in the other program, it was forbidden. In the state's program, if I recall correctly,
Yeah,
you could not provide state money if you received a PPP. We were just saying in the program that we had a little bit more discretion on the Federal CARES Act program, that it wouldn't be a priority, but that's something the council can give us some direction.
it could be part of the point system where it's not a hard eliminator, but you get less points or something.
Yeah, that's what it was in the CARES Act program.
So in the materials that Bruce handed out, distributed, the point systems were shown in there. I didn't put it on the PowerPoint because, believe it or not, I was trying to cut down words. I know it's a very wordy presentation, but Bruce, can you point to each?
I'll go. Yeah. So what we were saying is just our recommendation is the point system, just a weighted point system, and we said businesses that were forced to close completely by the governor's order, 4 points. The next one, businesses that were restricted in operation by the governor's office, restaurants, for example, that couldn't be on the inside, they were 3 points. The next one, businesses that requested funding for their physical facility, the mortgages, or their lease, or the utility, 2 points. Another one was businesses that did not receive any previous federal, state, or county money, didn't include city, county money, was 1 point. And then businesses that are located in commercial storefront, industrial space, office, 1 point, and then historically disadvantaged business owners, 1 point. And that was because of some language in the county IGA that we felt we had to give a point, consider that. So those are the proposed points.
Yeah, okay, I missed that, I apologize. A follow-up question on some of the requirements, and maybe this is moot if it just becomes a point system, but how are we verifying that people have or haven't received other types of funds that would eliminate them? Is it just honor system?
Some of this is going to have to be self-certification. What we're going to have to do, particularly under the CARES Act program, is we're going to have to actually, if somebody wants to receive a grant, they're going to have to demonstrate to us what their economic impact is. So we're going to need actual documentation. Eventually, there could be audits of the county, which is receiving the money, and then audits of us, in essence. But as far as some of these other things, there's a fair amount of self-certification, both in the CARES Act funding component, the $248,000, and very much also in some aspects of the Business Oregon funding, the state funding. So there is going to have to be some self-certification.
Sandra, do you have another
I have a question.
Okay. Renee?
Yeah, so I know of at least 2 businesses who did receive PPP funds, but instead of using it for staff, they used it to update their facilities or update their operations so that they could prepare to reopen once they were able to reopen. So would that forego them being able to apply for, I think it's the CARES funding, if they didn't spend it on the staff?
Yeah, it wouldn't, as far as I can explain it, it would not prevent them from applying under the CARES program, because the CARES program would simply not give them a point for the PPP. It would, I think, prevent them from applying for the state program, because the state program is really clear about not allowing funding that was received through the PPP. I think is the date of the application to us. I think that's what was said. So, I mean, the programs they're different programs.
Gotcha.
They have different requirements imposed on us to some extent.
So basically, if you've received
Thank you.
PPP, if you've received PPP or EIDL or any of that federal CARES money, it doesn't eliminate you from receiving a grant from this CARES program. It just doesn't give you that point.
Right.
That's correct.
I generally hate point systems, but I think we don't have a choice here.
Your alternative.
Right. It is not an easy thing. Just chew on your point plan. I'm not convinced that that's the right balance of a point plan. But I'll just leave it to you guys to think about it some more.
The last time we used a point plan for something, we got ourselves in a pickle.
Well, and Mayor, I appreciate that. I think as you guys think about this, providing some input, I don't want to develop a system that doesn't have support of the council. It's very important. I mean, it's not perfect, like you said, and you hate point system, but I want something that at least you support as a elected body. And you may not have any other ideas, that's fine, but if you think of something like what the weighting is, if we're giving too much to something, I'd love to hear that either now or over the coming days, so.
I'll definitely get my input back on that one. I'll get through the written version and send back some thoughts on the weighting.
Because at the end of the day, we're going to very likely have more requests than we have money for, and we want to have some basis for why we're not able to give someone some money and someone else gets the money.
Yeah.
We need something that is not, that is known up front and cannot be accused of playing favorites or something.
Right.
And the point system is known up front, and we uphold the point system, then, we're...
And even with the point system, we may come down with some ties that's where the lottery system's going to come out. I mean,
Exactly.
Yep.
When was our plan to get this open to?
It's in the documents.
It's in there. There's some requirements.
Takes a while.
It's some requirements, for example, in the county IGA, which will come to you next meeting, that says that the county actually has to approve our plan. And we can't get the funding until they've done that. And because in reality, it's CARES money for the county, and the county is a little nervous that 2 years from now the feds come and do an audit, and then they have to go to the cities, basically. So that's why this does take a little longer than I think we really would like. But there's some process. Plus, in the state's program, we have to submit to them everyone we're proposing an award to, and they have to check then to see if those businesses got money from the state previously or something like that, because they may have businesses in different cities, that kind of thing. So schedule takes longer than I think we would have liked. Businesses
It's
need
a little
money.
bit more bureaucratic than I think all of us would like.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely is.
I get it.
Well, considering the county got this money back in late April, we could have been starting on this a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for that reminder.
And compared to the rest of the state, we're actually ahead of the rest of the state.
And to be clear for anyone that just heard my comment, I'm not talking about Sherwood, I'm talking about the county that started a lot longer ago, or started this a lot longer. You get what
They got 104 million just direct deposited in their bank account. Quite a while ago.
Good interest.
Sure they want to sit on that as long as they can.
All pretty much across the country, every state, county, city that got any of that money, they're hoping, they're delaying in a lot of ways to hope that the feds, if they don't award a new program to help them, their general fund, that they convert CARES money to a general fund. That's the consensus. So we'll see what happens. Any other feedback or thoughts on these two, or the generally go to the order?
Yeah, thanks for all the hard work, you guys.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Not an easy thing. What we did before was nice, simple. It was great.
This is already.
These drive me crazy.
I know.
I wonder what we would do if we didn't have an economic development manager during COVID.
We would not be where we are right now.
I think Joe would be completely gray.
Yeah, I have no hair, actually.
Great, so you're losing your hair too?
No, not
yet?
Not yet. Thank goodness, not yet. So.
Bruce wants some company. I need some company.
Yeah.
All right, if nothing else really good, we'll, it's 9 o'clock. Thanks, everybody, for spending your evening.
I have one more question.
Yeah? Scott?
Sorry. In regard, so we have the 4 tiers of grant awards we're proposing based on the number of FTEs.
Right.
Does that have to be based on the number of FTEs? Are we required to do it that way, or is that just something we're proposing?
Nope. It's just something. I think we looked at. I think that they didn't use quite the same numbers, but we thought FTE might just give an idea.
Yeah,
of the value of jobs.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of not. I'm noodling on whether that's the best way to tier the money awards. There's
really
some
want to do
businesses
it
that have a low number of FTEs but a huge overhead of space, for example, or vice versa.
Or whoever's had the largest negative impact on their business, or, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know an alternative, I just wondering.
The challenge that we had when we thought about the idea of even looking at it from a business loss point of view, is that this is $280,000, and we're, it's not a big operation that we can look at everybody's financial statements for making it up, another 100 businesses. That's quite a bit.
Do we have to tier it
Quite a simpler way of doing it.
Can we just set a single number, and if you have enough points, you all get the same amount?
Yes is the answer. They could if that's the support or the direction council gives staff. Yeah, that is absolute. So yes, part of the challenge, is verifying FTEs. You have to review. Review in some fashion. The different point systems. Yes. Okay. So what do you do? How did it? Was there a timeline? How long the governor, required you got your business shut down? Did it shut down for a month and was able to restart? Is that the minimum amount of time, or was it until phase 1 happened? Is that what the intent was? If the governor shut them down? It's the details that could drive you.
All right. Yeah. I'll circulate some feedback to you guys, not the council, but the others, staff.
I'd like to say that I like Doug's comment, and I wouldn't mind seeing an alternate plan that says we could do this, or we could just, here's the amount, we would just do everybody who qualifies. I really like that idea.
Or 2 tiers instead of 4 or something.
Yeah, because someone, exactly what you said, someone who was shut down and has a whole bunch of part-time people, or someone who stayed open and has, 4 or 5 FTEs. I mean, who deserves more to get the money? That's such a subjective.
Yeah. Or if you're rent $3,000 a month and you have 1 employee, or 20 employees, or your rent's $10,000 a month and you have 2 employees. I mean,
is there anything stopping us from, through this program with the county, focusing on the larger businesses where we need to do the audits and really understand their need? And I'm just throwing this out here, but take the money that we're going to get sent back to us for our previous grant program, and then set up a smaller program that just focuses on the smaller businesses where we have kind of these issues, and make that process really easy for the small businesses. Just throwing that out there.
Basically, reinfusing the money that we're going to get back.
Right.
Part of it.
Yeah.
And we have other things too that don't,
Yeah. It could be a simple matter of just mailing a check to every small business registered that didn't get the bigger funding, right? Divide the number of businesses by the number of things and say everybody gets $500 or something. Just throw it out there.
All right, so any input we have, get it to staff.
Yeah. I think that's great.
Okay. Awesome.
All right.
Anything else for the good? We're at almost 9:15. Well, 9:10. These are good comments. We can go till midnight if y'all want to.
Gavel it.
3 hours of lunch, this is enough.
Yeah, we've gone over the allotted time for a virtual meeting.
That's right.
This was 4 virtual meetings, not 1.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Do it, Mayor, do it.